I watched through my kitchen window as the bright orange heating oil truck rounded the corner onto Maple Ridge Drive, and my chest tightened when I saw the silver Lexus already parked diagonally across my driveway entrance. It was the first week of January in Burlington, Vermont, the temperature hovering at a brutal 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and my oil tank gauge had been screaming empty for 2 days now. I had been nursing my home with space heaters and praying the pipes would not freeze before this delivery arrived. The woman standing beside that Lexus was none other than Patricia Henderson, the self-appointed queen of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. She wore a puffy white coat that made her look like an overstuffed marshmallow, and her blonde highlights caught the weak winter sunlight as she crossed her arms and planted herself firmly in front of my driveway. I felt my blood pressure spike immediately. My name is Yakov Volkov, and I had moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago after my divorce was finalized. I needed a fresh start, somewhere quiet where I could rebuild my life and focus on my work as a freelance software engineer. The house was perfect, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a detached garage and a yard that backed onto a small wooded area. The HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time, just another box to check during closing. How wrong I had been about that assessment. I grabbed my jacket and stormed outside, my boots crunching on the salt-covered walkway. The oil truck driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray beard, had already climbed out of his cab and was talking to Patricia. Even from 30 feet away, I could hear her shrill voice carrying across the frozen air. "This is completely unacceptable," Patricia was saying, waving a clipboard in the driver's face. Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that commercial vehicles are not permitted to park on residential streets during daylight hours. I have documented 3 separate violations this month alone, and I will not tolerate another one. The driver looked exhausted, like this was not his first rodeo with an unreasonable homeowner. "Madam, I am not parking. I am making a delivery. This gentleman needs heating oil and I need access to his driveway to reach his fill pipe." "I don't care what you need," Patricia snapped. "Rules are rules. If Mr. Volkov wanted a delivery, he should have scheduled it for after 6 p.m. when commercial vehicle restrictions are lifted." I reached them and interrupted before this could escalate further. "Patricia, move your car, now." I scheduled this delivery 3 weeks ago and the company gave me this time slot. I have been without heat for 2 days. She turned to face me, her thin lips pressed into a tight line of disapproval. Her eyes, a watery blue, scanned me up and down like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. "You should have consulted the HOA guidelines before scheduling, Yakov. This is exactly the kind of thoughtless behavior that degrades our community standards." Community standards. I felt my hands clench into fists inside my jacket pockets. "Patricia, it is 8 degrees outside." "My house is 52 degrees inside. I have pipes that are on the verge of freezing and bursting. I need this delivery right now, not after 6 p.m. That sounds like a personal problem stemming from poor planning." She adjusted her grip on the clipboard and clicked her pen with an air of finality. "I suggest you reschedule for an appropriate time. Until then, my vehicle will remain exactly where it is." The oil truck driver sighed heavily. "Look, folks, I have 6 more deliveries today. If I cannot access this fill pipe in the next 5 minutes, I need to move on to my next stop. We can try to fit you in next week, but with this cold snap, everyone is running low." Next week. The words hit me like a physical blow. I would never make it a week without heat in this weather. The space heaters I had been running were already driving my electric bill through the roof, and they barely kept the main living areas above 60 degrees. My bedroom felt like a meat locker. "Patricia, be reasonable," I tried again, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Just move your car for 20 minutes. That is all we need." "No." She said it with such smug certainty that I wanted to scream. "You will follow the rules like everyone else in this neighborhood, or you will face the consequences. I am already preparing a formal violation notice for your attempt to allow this delivery during restricted hours." The driver was already climbing back into his truck. "Sorry, buddy. I cannot wait around while you two sort this out. Call the office and we will get you rescheduled." "Wait." I called after him, but the diesel engine was already rumbling to life. I watched helplessly as the orange truck executed a careful three-point turn and disappeared back down the street, leaving me standing in the cold with Patricia and her insufferable smile. "I will be submitting a full report to the HOA board," she informed me, making a note on her clipboard. "This constitutes your second violation this quarter. One more and we will be forced to impose fines." Something inside me snapped. I had tried being polite. I had tried being reasonable. I had followed every ridiculous rule this woman and her HOA cronies had thrown at me for 6 months. I had repainted my mailbox because it was the wrong shade of black. I had replaced my garden hose because it was visible from the street. I had even taken down my bird feeder because it apparently attracted nuisance wildlife. Enough was enough. "Patricia," I said quietly, "move your car right now or I am calling a tow truck." Her eyes widened and then she actually laughed. "You would not dare. I am parked on a public street." "You have no authority to have me towed. You are blocking a residential driveway. That is illegal in Vermont regardless of your HOA nonsense. So either you move it or the city will move it for you. Your choice." Her face flushed red beneath her makeup. "How dare you threaten me? I am the HOA president, and I will not be bullied by some newcomer who thinks the rules do not apply to him." I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. Patricia watched me with growing disbelief, clearly not expecting me to follow through. When the dispatcher answered, I calmly explained the situation. A vehicle was illegally blocking my driveway, preventing a necessary heating oil delivery during dangerously cold weather. The dispatcher took my address and said an officer would be there within 30 minutes, and that I could also contact a towing company directly since it was a clear violation. "You are making a huge mistake," Patricia hissed as I ended the call. "The HOA board will hear about this." "We can make your life very difficult, Yakov." "You have already been making my life difficult," I replied, scrolling through my phone for the number of the towing company I had seen advertised around town. "I am just returning the favor." She stood there sputtering as I made the second call. Metro Burlington Towing answered on the third ring, and I explained the situation again. The dispatcher there was much more enthusiastic, confirming they could have a truck there in 15 to 20 minutes for a standard obstruction tow. I gave them the make, model, and license plate of Patricia's Lexus and hung up. "This is harassment," Patricia shrieked. "I will sue you for this." "Sue away," I said tiredly. "I am going inside where it is marginally warmer. If you are smart, you will move that car before the tow truck arrives." I turned and walked back to my house, ignoring her continued protests. Once inside, I called the heating oil company back and explained what had happened. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but confirmed what the driver had said. With the cold snap, they were completely booked for the next several days. The earliest they could fit me in was the following Thursday, 6 days away. I begged, I pleaded. I explained about the pipes and the space heaters and Patricia's interference, but there was simply nothing they could do. Every truck was running overtime as it was. I hung up feeling defeated and furious in equal measure. Through the window, I could see Patricia on her own phone, pacing back and forth beside her Lexus, probably calling her husband or the other HOA board members to complain about my audacity. True to their word, the tow truck arrived 18 minutes later. It was a heavy-duty flatbed with Metro Burlington Towing emblazoned on the side in bold letters. The driver, a younger guy with a shaved head and multiple ear piercings, hopped out and surveyed the situation. Patricia immediately rushed over to him, waving her arms dramatically. I went back outside to provide my statement. The tow truck driver, whose name tag read Derek, listened to Patricia's increasingly hysterical explanation about HOA rules and community standards before turning to me. "Your driveway?" he asked, pointing. "Yes. She has been blocking it for almost 30 minutes now, preventing a heating oil delivery." Derek nodded and pulled out his phone to take photos of the Lexus's position, the driveway, and the street signs. "Yeah, she is definitely in violation. Vermont Statute 23-1316, you cannot block a driveway entrance. Pretty straightforward." "This is outrageous." Patricia grabbed at Derek's arm and he smoothly stepped back out of reach. "I am the HOA president. I have authority over this neighborhood." "Madam, the HOA does not supersede state traffic laws," Derek said patiently, like he was explaining something to a child. "You are welcome to wait for the police to arrive if you want to dispute the tow, but I have the legal right to remove your vehicle from this location." A Burlington police cruiser turned onto our street at that moment, its lights off, but moving with purpose. Officer Martinez, according to her name badge, was a short Latina woman with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to all three of our accounts, examined Patricia's Lexus position, and consulted her own phone briefly before delivering her verdict. "Madam, your vehicle is illegally blocking this resident's driveway," she told Patricia. "You need to move it immediately, or the tow will proceed." "But the HOA rules." Patricia tried again, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "Do not override city and state laws," Officer Martinez finished. "You have 60 seconds to move your vehicle or it will be towed at your expense. Your choice." I could see the exact moment Patricia realized she had lost. Her shoulders sagged, and her face crumpled from righteous indignation to barely suppressed fury. She yanked her car keys from her pocket and jabbed the unlock button with more force than necessary. "This is not over," she said, glaring at me as she stalked to her driver's side door. "The HOA board will be discussing this incident at our next meeting. You can expect formal consequences, Yakov." "Looking forward to it," I replied dryly. She peeled out with an aggressive acceleration that seemed excessive for a residential street, her Lexus fishtailing slightly on a patch of ice before she regained control and disappeared around the corner. Officer Martinez watched her go with raised eyebrows. "She seems pleasant," the officer commented. "You need me to stick around, or are we good here?" "We are good. Thank you for coming out." "No problem. Word of advice, though, document everything with your HOA. People like that tend to hold grudges and they love to make stuff up later." Photos, emails, certified letters, the whole 9 yards. She was not wrong. I thanked her again, and she drove off with a casual wave. Derek, the tow truck driver, hung around long enough to confirm he would not be charging me a service fee since the vehicle had moved before the actual tow. "Happens sometimes," he said with a shrug. "Just the threat of the tow is enough. Good luck with your HOA lady, though. She looks like a piece of work." After everyone left, I stood alone in my driveway, the victory feeling hollow. Yes, I had won this particular battle, but Patricia had been clear that the war was far from over. And more importantly, I still did not have any heating oil. My tank was empty. My next delivery was 6 days away, and Burlington, Vermont was in the grip of the coldest January in 30 years. I went back inside and started researching emergency heating options. The space heaters were helping, but they were not enough. I needed something more. I called every heating oil company within a 50-mile radius, but they were all in the same situation, completely slammed with emergency calls, no availability for nearly a week. I even tried calling companies as far away as Montpelier and Rutland, but got the same answer everywhere. By evening, my house had dropped to 48 degrees despite running 3 space heaters at full blast. I could see my breath when I exhaled. I dragged my mattress into the living room and set up a kind of nest around the largest space heater, piling on every blanket I owned. It was going to be a miserable night, and I had 6 more ahead of me. Around 8 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway in case it was one of the heating companies calling me back. "Is this Yakov Volkov?" A man's voice, formal and cold, speaking. "This is Gerald Henderson, Patricia's husband. I am also on the HOA board. I understand there was an incident today involving my wife and a tow truck." I resisted the urge to groan. "Your wife illegally blocked my driveway and prevented an emergency heating oil delivery." I called the appropriate authorities. The police confirmed I was in the right. "That may be," Gerald said, his tone suggesting he thought otherwise, "but your disrespectful treatment of a board member will not be tolerated. We are calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the community center. Your attendance is mandatory to discuss your multiple violations and determine appropriate sanctions." "What violations?" I demanded. "Trying to get heating oil delivered, following Vermont state law." "Harassment of an HOA board member, abuse of emergency services, disruption of neighborhood peace, creating a public spectacle. Shall I continue?" This was unbelievable. "Those are completely fabricated charges, and you know it. The board will make that determination tomorrow night. 7 p.m. sharp. If you fail to attend, we will proceed in your absence and the penalties will be more severe." He hung up before I could respond. I threw my phone onto the couch in frustration. Of course they were going to retaliate. Patricia struck me as exactly the type of person who could not stand being challenged or embarrassed. And now she had her husband and presumably the rest of the HOA board ready to back her up. I had no idea what kind of sanctions they could actually impose, but I knew HOAs had surprising amounts of power when they wanted to be vindictive. That night was brutal. Even wrapped in 4 blankets in my makeshift living room nest, I could not get warm. I dozed fitfully, waking up every hour or so to check that the space heaters were still running and that I could still feel my toes. By morning, frost had formed on the inside of some of my windows. The temperature in the house had dropped to 43 degrees in the hallway and upstairs bedrooms. I did not even want to know what it was in the basement. I spent Tuesday working from my blanket nest, my laptop balanced on my knees, trying to focus on code while wearing 2 pairs of socks, thermal underwear, jeans, 3 shirts, and a heavy sweater. My fingers were so stiff from the cold that I kept making typos. Every hour I would get up and walk around the house, checking for signs of frozen pipes. So far, everything seemed okay, but I knew I was pushing my luck. Around noon, I found an envelope had been shoved through my mail slot. It was a formal HOA violation notice, printed on expensive cream-colored cardstock with the Maple Ridge HOA logo at the top. According to the document, I was being cited for Violation 1, scheduling commercial vehicle access during restricted hours. Violation 2, harassment and verbal abuse of an HOA board member. Violation 3, creating a public disturbance by involving police and towing services unnecessarily. Violation 4. Failure to maintain proper household heating, which could lead to pipe damage and community liability. That last one made me want to put my fist through a wall. I was being cited for not having heat because Patricia had prevented me from getting heat. The circular logic was maddening. The notice concluded by informing me that the emergency board meeting would proceed as scheduled at 7 p.m., and that failure to attend would result in automatic fines of $500 per violation, totaling $2,000, plus potential legal action to place a lien on my property. I called a lawyer. I did not know any attorneys in Burlington, so I just Googled HOA lawyer Vermont and started making calls. Most of them were busy or did not handle HOA disputes, but I finally got through to a woman named Sandra Mayers who agreed to a phone consultation. I explained the entire situation: the blocked driveway, the tow truck, the missing heating oil delivery, and now the retaliatory violations and emergency meeting. Sandra listened carefully before responding. Okay, so the good news is that most of what they are accusing you of is nonsense. Vermont law is very clear that you cannot block a driveway, and you had every right to call for a tow. The bad news is that HOAs do have considerable authority when it comes to enforcing their bylaws, and they can make your life extremely difficult if they want to. Can they actually fine me $2,000 for this? Depends on what your HOA governing documents say. Did you receive a copy of the bylaws and covenants when you bought the house? I had, but I had only skimmed them at the time. They had been a 100-page document full of dense legal language. Yes, but I do not remember the details about fines. Find them and read sections about violations, penalties, and appeals processes. Also read about board meeting procedures. If they are not following their own rules, that gives you leverage. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of your thermostat readings, your empty oil tank, everything. Get a written statement from the oil delivery company about what happened. If you go to this meeting, stay calm, stick to facts, and do not let them provoke you into an emotional response. That is what they want. Should I have you come with me? I can, but it will cost you. My hourly rate is $350, and I would need a retainer of at least $2,000 upfront. Up to you if you think it is worth it. I thought about my dwindling savings account and the divorce that had already drained most of my resources. Let me see how tomorrow night goes. Maybe I can handle this myself. Your call. But if they do impose fines or threaten legal action, call me immediately. These things can snowball fast if you do not push back properly. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through my home purchase documents until I found the HOA packet. Reading through it was like wading through molasses, but certain sections stood out. The HOA did have the authority to impose fines for violations, but there was supposed to be a formal process. Written notice, a hearing where the homeowner could present a defense, and then a board vote. The emergency meeting seemed to meet those criteria, but some of the violations themselves seemed questionable. I also discovered that homeowners had the right to appeal any board decisions to the full HOA membership, and that fines could not be imposed without a majority board vote. The Maple Ridge HOA board consisted of 5 members: Patricia Henderson as president, her husband Gerald as treasurer, and 3 other neighborhood residents I had barely interacted with. I made a note to look up who they were and whether any of them might be reasonable. As 7 p.m. approached on Tuesday evening, I bundled up in my warmest clothes and walked the 3 blocks to the community center. It was a small brick building that the HOA used for meetings and neighborhood events, with a large main room and a few smaller offices. The heat was cranked up inside, and I almost wept with relief at the blast of warm air when I entered. Patricia, Gerald, and the 3 other board members were seated at a long table at the front of the room. About a dozen other neighbors were scattered in the folding chairs that faced the table, apparently there to watch the show. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood gatherings, but I would not call any of them friends. Patricia's face was a mask of cold fury when she saw me enter. Gerald looked smugly satisfied. The other 3 board members, 2 women and 1 man, all appeared uncomfortable. "Mr. Volkov," Patricia said formally, "thank you for attending. Please take a seat so we can begin." I sat in the front row, directly across from the board table. I had brought a folder containing printouts of the Vermont statute about blocking driveways, photos of my thermostat readings, and a written statement from the heating oil company confirming that my delivery had been scheduled for Monday morning and had been canceled due to driveway obstruction. I was as prepared as I could be. Patricia called the meeting to order and launched immediately into her account of Monday's events. According to her version, I had deliberately scheduled a commercial delivery during restricted hours as a way to antagonize the HOA. When she had politely attempted to educate me about the rules, I had become verbally abusive and threatening. I had then weaponized the police and a towing company to harass her, causing her severe emotional distress and making her feel unsafe in her own neighborhood. It was such a wildly distorted version of events that I almost laughed. But the way Patricia delivered it, with just the right mix of hurt feelings and moral outrage, I could see some of the neighbors nodding sympathetically. When she finished, Gerald read out the 4 violations and the proposed fines. $500 each, totaling $2,000, to be paid within 30 days or the HOA would place a lien on my property. "Mr. Volkov, you have the opportunity to respond to these charges," Patricia said, her tone making it clear she considered this a mere formality. I stood up, folder in hand. "Thank you. I would like to present some actual facts since Mrs. Henderson's account bears little resemblance to reality." I walked them through the timeline, my heating oil tank running empty during record cold weather, scheduling the delivery 3 weeks in advance for the only available time slot, Patricia deliberately parking across my driveway to block the delivery, my multiple attempts to reason with her, her refusal to move, my legal right under Vermont law to have an obstructing vehicle towed. I passed out copies of the relevant statute and my documentation. I was not harassing Mrs. Henderson, I concluded. I was trying to prevent my pipes from freezing and my house from becoming uninhabitable. She chose to interfere with that for no reason other than a petty insistence on an HOA rule that does not even apply to emergency deliveries. And now, I am stuck without heat for a week because of her actions, and somehow I am the one being fined. One of the other board members, a woman in her 60s with gray hair, raised her hand tentatively. "Patricia, is it true that Mr. Volkov's heating oil delivery was blocked? Does he not have heat right now?" "That is irrelevant," Patricia snapped. "He violated the commercial vehicle restrictions. There are no exceptions for personal convenience." "It is not personal convenience, it is an emergency," I said. "Look at the thermostat photos. My house is 43 degrees. In another day or 2, my pipes are going to freeze and burst, causing thousands of dollars in damage." The gray-haired woman, whose nameplate identified her as Dorothy Chen, looked troubled. "Patricia, I think we should consider postponing this hearing until Mr. Volkov has his heat restored. This seems like an extenuating circumstance." "Absolutely not," Gerald interjected. "Rules exist for a reason, Dorothy. If we start making exceptions for everyone who claims an emergency, the entire HOA structure breaks down. Mr. Volkov should have planned better." How exactly should I have planned for Mrs. Henderson to illegally block my driveway? I asked. Patricia's eyes flashed. I was not parked illegally. I was conducting official HOA business, inspecting properties for code violations, while parked diagonally across my driveway for 30 minutes. I was taking detailed notes on your unkempt front landscaping. The whole process requires time and concentration. This was going nowhere. I could see that Patricia and Gerald had already made up their minds, and they probably had the votes to push through the fines regardless of what I said. The other 3 board members looked uncomfortable, but not willing to directly challenge the president. I would like to invoke my right to appeal any decision this board makes to the full HOA membership, I said, remembering that provision from the bylaws. Section 12.4 of the governing documents. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. That is your right. However, the fines will still go into effect immediately pending the appeal hearing. You will be required to pay or enter into a payment plan within 30 days regardless. On what grounds? You have not even voted yet. Let us vote then. Patricia looked at her fellow board members. All in favor of imposing the violations and fines as stated, Patricia and Gerald immediately raised their hands. After a long, uncomfortable pause, the other man on the board, whose nameplate read Robert Mills, slowly raised his hand as well. Dorothy and the 5th board member, a younger woman named Jennifer Cole, kept their hands down. The motion passes 3-2, Patricia announced. Mr. Volkov, you will receive formal written notice of the fines within 48 hours. You have 30 days to pay or arrange a payment plan. This meeting is adjourned. I left the community center feeling like I had been punched in the gut. $2,000 in fines for the crime of trying to heat my home. It was extortion dressed up in official language and parliamentary procedure. Over the next 3 days, my house got colder. Wednesday morning, I woke up to discover that the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight, despite running the space heaters constantly. My electric bill was going to be astronomical. I spent the entire day working from a coffee shop downtown just so I could be somewhere warm, returning home only to sleep in my blanket nest. On Thursday, I found another envelope in my mail slot. This one contained the formal fine notice, printed on the same cream-colored cardstock, demanding payment of $2,000 by February 3rd. It helpfully included instructions for paying online or by check, and a stern warning about the consequences of non-payment, additional late fees, legal action, and property liens. I called Sandra Mayers again and explained what had happened at the meeting. She listened to everything and then sighed heavily. They are following the letter of their bylaws, even if the spirit is completely wrong, she said. The good news is that you do have grounds for an appeal. The better news is that I think you might also have grounds for a civil lawsuit against Mrs. Henderson, personally, for intentional interference with your heating oil delivery. Really, potentially. She deliberately blocked your access to an essential service during dangerous weather conditions. That is more than just an HOA dispute. It is potentially actionable as negligence or even reckless endangerment depending on how cold it gets and whether you suffer property damage. If your pipes freeze and burst, you would definitely have a case for damages. I would rather my pipes not burst in the first place, obviously, but I am just laying out your options. For now, focus on getting through this week and getting your heat back. Document every expense related to this situation. The electric bills from running space heaters, any hotel costs if you have to leave your home, meals out because you cannot cook in a freezing house, everything. If we do pursue legal action, we will want a full accounting of damages. Friday brought even colder weather. The forecast called for temperatures dropping to -5 degrees overnight, with wind chills approaching -20. I was genuinely scared now. My house was down to 36 degrees during the day, even with all the space heaters running. I could hear the heating system making strange creaking and groaning sounds as the cold penetrated deeper into the building's bones. That afternoon, I broke down and checked into a hotel. I could not afford it, but I also could not spend another night in a house that was barely above freezing. I booked 3 nights at a Hampton Inn near downtown Burlington, packed a bag with clothes and my laptop, and left the space heaters running on high to hopefully keep the pipes from freezing in my absence. The hotel room felt like paradise. I stood under a hot shower for 20 minutes, feeling sensation return to my extremities, before collapsing onto the bed fully dressed and passing out from exhaustion. The stress and lack of sleep from the past week had caught up with me all at once. Saturday morning, I drove back to my house to check on things. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. There was water running out from under my garage door and freezing into a sheet of ice across the driveway and down into the street. I rushed inside. The damage was worse than I had feared. A pipe had burst in the upstairs bathroom, and water had been pouring through the ceiling for who knows how long before the pressure finally dropped enough to slow the flow. The bathroom was flooded. Water had cascaded down through the first-floor ceiling below, destroying the hallway and part of my kitchen. The space heaters had not been enough. I shut off the main water valve and just stood there in the wreckage of my house, feeling numb. This was a disaster. The repair costs were going to be enormous, probably tens of thousands of dollars. I had homeowners insurance, but there would be a deductible, and I had no idea if they would even cover damage caused by lack of heat. I took probably 100 photos of everything: the burst pipe, the water damage, the ice, the thermostat still reading 34 degrees, the space heaters that had failed to prevent this nightmare. Then I called my insurance company and filed a claim. Then I called Sandra Mayers again. "I want to sue," I told her without preamble. "Patricia Henderson, Gerald Henderson, the HOA, everyone involved. They did this. They caused this. Tell me what happened." I explained about the burst pipe and the flooding and the damage. Sandra listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the timeline and the extent of the destruction. "Okay," she said finally. "I think you have a strong case. This goes beyond an HOA dispute now. This is significant property damage with a clear causal link to Mrs. Henderson's actions. I am going to refer you to a colleague who specializes in property damage litigation, Marcus Webb. He is expensive, but he is very good. In the meantime, do not sign anything, do not agree to anything, and do not pay those HOA fines. What about fixing my house? Let your insurance handle that for now. They will probably want to subrogate against the responsible parties anyway, which means they will be coming after the HOA and the Hendersons too, once they pay out your claim. Document everything, save every receipt, and start looking for a place to stay short-term because your house is going to be uninhabitable for a while." She gave me Marcus Webb's contact information, and I called him immediately. He agreed to meet with me Monday morning for a consultation. In the meantime, I had a flooded, freezing house and nowhere to live. I spent the rest of Saturday dealing with the immediate crisis. I called an emergency plumber who came out and assessed the damage, giving me a preliminary estimate of $12,000 just for the plumbing repairs. A restoration company came to start extracting water and setting up industrial fans and dehumidifiers. They estimated another $20,000 for the full water damage restoration. The total damage was going to be somewhere north of $40,000 by the time everything was repaired and replaced. Sunday morning, my heating oil delivery finally arrived. The truck pulled up right on schedule at 9 a.m., and the driver spent 15 minutes pumping 300 gallons into my tank. It cost me $873. Under normal circumstances, that oil would last me 6 weeks or so. Now, it was just going to heat an empty, water-damaged house while repairs were underway. I met with Marcus Webb on Monday morning at his office in downtown Burlington. He was a sharp-dressed man in his early 50s with silver hair and an easy confidence that immediately put me at ease. I walked him through everything. Patricia blocking my driveway, the missed oil delivery, the emergency HOA meeting, the fines, and finally the burst pipe and water damage. Marcus took extensive notes and reviewed all my documentation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers thoughtfully. "You have an excellent case," he said. "Possibly several cases, actually. Civil suit against Patricia Henderson personally for intentional interference and negligence. Civil suit against the HOA for retaliatory actions and failure to act in the community's best interests. Possibly even a criminal complaint for reckless endangerment, depending on how aggressive you want to get." "I want to get very aggressive," I said. "This woman destroyed my house because I had the audacity to stand up to her." "Understandable. Here is what I propose. We file a comprehensive civil suit against both Patricia Henderson individually and the Maple Ridge HOA as an organization. We are going to ask for full compensatory damages covering all your repair costs, temporary housing, lost work time, and other expenses. We are also going to ask for punitive damages given the egregious nature of her conduct. Additionally, we are going to seek an injunction preventing the HOA from imposing those fines and from taking any further retaliatory action against you." "How much are we talking in total?" "Compensatory damages will probably be around $50,000 to $60,000 once we factor everything in. Punitive damages, I would argue for at least another $50,000. So we are looking at a lawsuit in the range of $100,000 to $120,000. I whistled softly. "And your fees?" "I work on contingency for cases like this. 33% of whatever we recover, plus expenses. If we win $100,000, you take home about $67,000 after my fees and costs. If we lose, you pay nothing except the filing fees and other hard costs." It seemed fair given the circumstances. "Let us do it." "Excellent. I will have the paperwork drawn up by tomorrow. In the meantime, I want you to continue documenting everything. Every expense, every interaction with the HOA, everything. And I want you to file a police report about the initial incident with your driveway being blocked." The police were already there. They made Patricia move. "I know, but I want a formal report on file that documents what happened. It will help establish the timeline and the causal chain. Just go to the station and ask to file a report for the record." I did exactly that. I went to the Burlington Police Department and filed a formal report detailing the events of January 5th. Patricia blocking my driveway, preventing the oil delivery, my call to police, Officer Martinez's response, and Patricia's eventual removal under threat of towing. The desk officer took my statement and gave me a case number for my records. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Marcus filed the lawsuit on Thursday, January 15th. The complaint was a thing of beauty. 32 pages of detailed allegations and legal arguments that systematically laid out how Patricia's actions had led directly to the destruction of my property. It named both Patricia individually and the Maple Ridge HOA as defendants and demanded $120,000 in damages plus attorney's fees. The local news picked up the story on Friday. Homeowner sues HOA president after pipe burst, read the headline in the Burlington Free Press. The article was surprisingly sympathetic to my position, painting Patricia as an overzealous busybody who had let petty rule enforcement lead to disaster. They even included quotes from some of my neighbors, several of whom apparently had their own horror stories about Patricia's iron-fisted approach to HOA governance. Patricia and Gerald responded with their own lawsuit the following Monday, claiming defamation and demanding I retract my allegations and pay them $50,000 for damage to their reputations. Marcus assured me it was a nuisance suit and likely to be dismissed, but it still added another layer of stress to the entire situation. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for Tuesday evening, but this time I did not attend. Marcus had advised me not to have any direct contact with the defendants while litigation was pending. Instead, he sent a formal letter to the board demanding they suspend all fines and violations pending resolution of the lawsuit, and warning them that any further retaliatory actions would be added to our complaint. My insurance company came through faster than I expected. The adjuster inspected the damage, reviewed my documentation, and approved a payout of $38,000 to cover repairs and restoration. They also sent a letter to the HOA and Patricia indicating they would be pursuing subrogation to recover their costs. Suddenly, Patricia was not just dealing with my lawsuit, but also a major insurance company coming after her. The repairs to my house took nearly 3 weeks. The restoration company had to gut the bathroom completely, replace sections of ceiling and wall in multiple rooms, repair the burst pipe and surrounding plumbing, and address water damage throughout the first floor. I stayed in the hotel the entire time, watching my savings account dwindle even with the insurance money helping. By early February, my house was finally habitable again. The repairs looked good, better than the original in some cases, but the whole experience had left me exhausted and emotionally drained. I moved back in and tried to return to some semblance of normal life. The lawsuit ground forward through the legal system. Marcus had warned me that civil litigation could take months or even years, but Patricia's defense attorney seemed eager to discuss settlement relatively quickly. By mid-March, we received a settlement offer. The HOA would rescind all fines and violations. Patricia would step down as HOA president, and they would pay $40,000 toward my damages. In exchange, I would release both Patricia and the HOA from further liability. I was tempted to take it just to be done with the whole mess, but Marcus advised me to hold firm. They would not offer $40,000 if they did not think we could get more, he said. Let me counter with $90,000 and see what happens. The negotiation continued for another month. Offers and counteroffers flew back and forth. Patricia's attorney argued that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president, and thus her actions were protected. Marcus demolished that argument by pointing out that blocking a driveway was not an HOA enforcement action. It was a personal decision that violated state law. The insurance company's subrogation claim added pressure from another direction. In late April, we finally reached a settlement. Patricia Henderson would pay $35,000 from her personal funds. The HOA would pay another $40,000 from their reserve funds and insurance coverage. All fines and violations would be permanently removed from my record. Patricia would resign as HOA president effective immediately, and both parties would sign mutual non-disparagement agreements preventing either side from publicly discussing the case. The total settlement of $75,000 minus Marcus's fees and expenses, left me with just over $47,000. Combined with the insurance payout, it was enough to cover all my actual costs and leave me with a small cushion to rebuild my depleted savings. More importantly, it was vindication. Patricia had learned that she could not bully people without consequences, but there was one more twist to come. In early May, I received a call from Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Burlington Police Department. She explained that based on my police report and the civil lawsuit, the district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation into Patricia's conduct. Specifically, they were looking at possible charges of reckless endangerment and criminal mischief. "We take these kinds of situations seriously," Detective Rodriguez explained when we met at my house. "When someone's deliberate actions during extreme weather conditions lead to significant property damage, that crosses the line from a civil dispute into potential criminal behavior. I need to get a full statement from you about what happened." I walked her through everything once again. She took detailed notes and collected copies of all my documentation. She also interviewed several of my neighbors, the oil delivery driver, the tow truck operator, and Officer Martinez, who had responded to the original call. In July, the district attorney filed criminal charges against Patricia Henderson, one count of reckless endangerment in the second degree, and one count of criminal mischief in the third degree. Both were misdemeanors, but they carried potential jail time and mandatory fines. Patricia's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that this was a civil matter that had already been resolved through settlement. The judge disagreed, noting that the civil settlement addressed my personal damages but did not resolve the state's interest in prosecuting potentially criminal conduct. The trial took place in September. I testified about the blocked driveway, the missed oil delivery, the burst pipe, and the extensive damage to my home. The oil delivery driver testified about Patricia's refusal to move and her statements about HOA rules. Officer Martinez testified about finding Patricia's car blocking my driveway and the legal basis for the threatened tow. The prosecution argued that Patricia's actions were not simply negligent but reckless. She had deliberately prevented an emergency heating delivery during dangerous weather. She had been clearly warned about the consequences, and she had persisted anyway out of nothing more than petty vindictiveness. The resulting property damage was both foreseeable and severe. Patricia's defense tried to argue that she had no way of knowing my pipes would burst, and that she was simply enforcing HOA rules as she understood them. But Marcus had made sure during our civil case to get discovery of all Patricia's emails and text messages from that time period. Several of them showed her discussing with Gerald how they needed to teach that arrogant newcomer a lesson, and how they hoped I would freeze my ass off and learn some respect. Those messages destroyed any claim that she had been acting in good faith. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia Henderson guilty on both counts. At sentencing in October, the judge was blunt in her assessment. "Mrs. Henderson, you were in a position of trust and authority within your community, and you abused that position to bully a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. Your actions during extremely dangerous weather conditions directly led to tens of thousands of dollars in property damage. While I appreciate that you have no prior criminal record, this conduct was serious enough to warrant significant consequences." Patricia was sentenced to 60 days in jail, suspended, meaning she would not serve actual jail time unless she violated the terms of her probation. She was also sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay a fine of $5,000 to the state. Additionally, the judge issued a protective order preventing her from having any contact with me or my property for 2 years. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had been carrying for 9 months. Patricia had faced real consequences for her actions. The HOA had been forced to change leadership and reform some of their more draconian enforcement policies. And I had been made whole financially. Even if I could never get back the time and stress this entire ordeal had cost me. The new HOA board, led by Dorothy Chen, who had been the only member to show any sympathy during that original hearing, reached out to me in November. They wanted to apologize for how I had been treated and to discuss reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. I agreed to meet with them. The conversation was productive. The board agreed to revise the commercial vehicle restrictions to include explicit exceptions for emergency deliveries and essential services. They also implemented new procedures for violation hearings that included mandatory cooling-off periods and requirements for board members to recuse themselves from cases where they had personal involvement. And they established an appeal process that went directly to the full membership, rather than back through the same board that had imposed the original violation. I even agreed to serve on a committee to review and update the HOA bylaws to make them more reasonable and less prone to abuse. It was not something I had ever wanted to do, but I figured I had earned the right to have a say in how this organization operated after everything I had been through. By the time the first anniversary of that January morning rolled around, my life had largely returned to normal. My house was fully repaired and actually improved in some ways from the insurance-funded renovations. My relationship with most of my neighbors had recovered once they learned the full story and realized that Patricia had been the problem, not me. I had even started dating someone I met at a neighborhood barbecue that summer, a teacher named Teresa Hawkins who lived 2 streets over and who had her own horror stories about Patricia's HOA reign of terror. The heating oil delivery that January was uneventful. The truck arrived at its scheduled time. I watched from my window as the driver filled my tank, and nobody blocked my driveway or created any drama. It was perfectly boring. Sometimes I would see Patricia around town, usually at the grocery store or occasionally at a restaurant. We never spoke or acknowledged each other. She looked diminished somehow, smaller and less certain than the imperious woman who had blocked my driveway that freezing morning. I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she and Gerald had considered moving out of Maple Ridge but ultimately stayed, though they kept largely to themselves now, and Patricia no longer involved herself in any HOA matters. I did not take any pleasure in her downfall, not really. I had never wanted things to escalate the way they had. All I had wanted was to heat my home during the coldest January Vermont had seen in decades. But Patricia had made a series of choices, each one worse than the last, that had turned a simple delivery into a legal nightmare that consumed months of all our lives and cost her tens of thousands of dollars, her reputation in the community, and ultimately a criminal record. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, always read your HOA bylaws carefully before buying a home, and think seriously about whether you want to live somewhere with that level of potential interference in your life. Second, document everything when you are dealing with difficult people in positions of minor authority, because those records can be invaluable if things go wrong. Third, know your rights under state and local law, because HOA rules cannot override actual statutes no matter how much the HOA board might wish otherwise. And fourth, sometimes you have to stand up to bullies even when it is expensive and stressful, because backing down just encourages them to target someone else. Looking back, I could have handled some things differently. Maybe I could have tried harder to work with Patricia before jumping straight to calling the tow truck. Maybe I could have found a way to heat my house that did not rely on that single delivery at that specific time. But ultimately, I had been dealing with a person who saw any challenge to her authority as a personal attack that demanded overwhelming retaliation. No amount of politeness or accommodation would have satisfied someone like Patricia Henderson. The people of Maple Ridge were better off without her running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Property values had actually increased slightly after the leadership change, according to the local real estate reports, possibly because potential buyers were no longer scared off by stories of the tyrannical HOA president. The neighborhood felt more relaxed, more like an actual community rather than a suburban police state. I still live in that same house on Maple Ridge Drive. My heating oil tank is full, my pipes are working perfectly, and nobody has blocked my driveway in over a year. The nightmares about waking up to frozen pipes have mostly faded, though I still find myself checking the thermostat obsessively whenever the temperature drops below 20 degrees. Teresa and I are talking about moving in together, probably to a house in her school district that has no HOA at all. We have been looking at properties in nearby Colchester and Essex, where you can actually choose your own mailbox color without needing approval from a committee of busybodies. The idea of living somewhere without covenants and bylaws and violation notices is incredibly appealing. But for now, I am content where I am. I have my home, my work, my relationship, and my peace of mind. I have a community that feels like a real community now rather than a battlefield. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that when Patricia Henderson tried to freeze me out, literally and figuratively, I did not just survive it. I fought back, I won. And I made sure she could never do the same thing to anyone else. That freezing week in January cost me thousands of dollars, months of stress, and a significant portion of my sanity. But it also taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that the legal system does sometimes work the way it is supposed to, and that standing up for yourself matters, even when it would be easier to just pay the fine and move on. Every time I hear my furnace kick on now, every time I feel that rush of warm air through the vents, I am reminded of how precious and important such simple comforts really are. And every time the heating oil truck makes its scheduled delivery, pulling into my unobstructed driveway without drama or interference, I feel a small surge of gratitude for boring, normal days where everything works exactly as it should. Patricia learned an expensive lesson about the limits of HOA authority and the dangers of letting personal vindictiveness override common sense. The Maple Ridge HOA learned that they serve the community, not the other way around, and that rules without reason are just opportunities for abuse. And I learned that home is not just about the building you live in, but about having the freedom and security to actually live your life without someone in a position of petty power making every day a battle. It has been over a year since that terrible morning when I watched the orange oil truck drive away and knew I was facing a week of freezing temperatures with no heat. I survived it. My house survived it, barely. And in the end, justice was served both in civil court and criminal court. Patricia paid a heavy price for her actions, both financially and personally, and the criminal conviction will follow her for years to come. I do not consider myself a vindictive person. I never wanted to destroy Patricia's life or reputation. But I also was not going to let her destroy mine without fighting back with every legal tool at my disposal. The settlement money helped, The criminal conviction provided validation, but the real victory was simpler than that. The real victory was that I got my heat back, my house got repaired, and I got to stay in my home and rebuild my life on my own terms. Sometimes late at night, when the wind howls outside and the temperature plummets, I think about those days huddled in my blanket nest with space heaters struggling to keep the temperature above freezing. I think about watching the water pour through my ceiling from that burst pipe and feeling like my entire world was collapsing. And then I look at my thermostat reading a comfortable 68 degrees. I listen to my furnace running smoothly in the basement, and I smile. Patricia blocked my heating oil truck because she thought she had the power to make me comply with her arbitrary interpretation of HOA rules. She thought that her position as president meant she could bully people into submission without consequences. She was wrong on both counts. I had her towed because she was breaking the law. She froze until my delivery finally came the following week, because those were the natural consequences of her own choices. And she ended up with a criminal record, tens of thousands of dollars in settlements and fines, and the loss of her HOA presidency because the system worked the way it was supposed to. The whole experience reinforced my faith in the legal system, while simultaneously confirming my suspicion that HOAs are fundamentally problematic institutions that give small-minded people too much power over their neighbors' lives. I would never choose to live in an HOA neighborhood again if I had the choice. But since I am here, at least I know I can fight back if necessary, and that fighting back can actually lead to meaningful change. The Maple Ridge HOA is a better organization now than it was under Patricia's leadership. The rules are more reasonable, the enforcement is less arbitrary, and the board members actually seem to care about serving the community rather than wielding power over it. I like to think that my lawsuit and Patricia's criminal prosecution contributed to that change, even though it came at a high cost. As winter approaches again, I find myself watching the weather forecasts more carefully than I used to. I scheduled my heating oil deliveries further in advance. I keep extra blankets and emergency supplies on hand, just in case. The trauma of that experience lingers even though the practical problems have long since been resolved. But I am not afraid anymore. I know I can handle whatever comes, whether it is a Vermont cold snap or an out-of-control HOA president. And if anyone ever tries to block my driveway again, well, I have the towing company on speed dial and a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. I am not the same person who moved into this neighborhood 18 months ago, uncertain and willing to go along to get along. I am someone who has been tested and who came out stronger on the other side. Patricia Henderson gave me that gift, even if she never intended to. For that, I suppose I should thank her, but I probably never will.